right, so thank you so much for coming. It's quite a, imagine there's 4 sessions going on right now and I managed to have people sitting on the floor. That's pretty good. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I guess with that subject in mind, I'll go straight into it. So my name is Ditlev Bredal. I've been in this hosting industry forever. My first, actually before '96, I started up a BBS. Do you guys remember Fidonet? Any of you old enough for that? I guess not. Before the hosting industry, there was, yeah, you do, right? I know you would, yeah. So I've been doing this for a very long time. The last 6 years, I was the CEO of a company called UK2 Group, which was the largest hosted business I've run. I built a whole bunch of brands in there, VPS.net, 100tb.com, ReselBiz, and ran UK2.net, Midphase, and hosting, and a lot of other stuff. I made a bunch of acquisitions, and I sold a few companies as well. The last one was UK2 Group for 77 million to LDC, which is Lloyds Development Capital, for what seems like 10 years ago, but I guess it's like, what, a year and a half ago or something like that now? I can't even remember doing that. And now I'm the CEO and founder of OnApp. OnApp is the largest cloud hosting platform worldwide with around 50–60% market share. And I'm Danish, that's why I carry this goofy accent, and like any other Dane, I like explaining everything I don't understand using Lego and Star Wars. So there'll be a lot of that stuff going on here. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it's just because I like that stuff. So I sort of chug it in here and there. Yeah, so I want to just start out by defining, when I talk about cloud, what do I actually talk about? Because God knows if I ask you guys, 10 of you, I'll probably get 20 opinions about it. So I just want to talk about that. When I talk about, yeah, there you go. I'm starting with the Lego stuff now. When I talk about cloud, I'm not talking about SaaS, I'm not talking about PaaS, but I'm talking about the infrastructure as a service play. So the stuff that Phil spoke about before, sitting in Amazon, that Google is launching now with Google Compute Engine, and the stuff that Rackspace is running on top of OpenStack. First though, I will take my 5 minutes on OnApp. I promise it won't be more. So OnApp is a software business that enables service providers to sell cloud hosting, but also CDN, and we have a storage product that's just been launched in public beta. We have 2 core products, a cloud platform and a CDN platform, and we just launched our storage, as I said. The cloud software platform is like an orchestration platform that basically sits on top of your infrastructure and enables you, sort of to put it very briefly, to compete with the Amazons out there. And we have around 50–60% of all public clouds in the world are using our software. And more than 1,000 installs under our hood now, and we set somewhere between 2 and 5 live every day, including weekends. It's basically this stuff. So we sit on top of the hypervisor, on top of your VMware, your SYN, your KVM, and we have a deployment layer. So the deployment layer is what we share with the OpenStacks and CloudStacks out there. This is where the failover happens. This is where the auto scaling, the hot migration, all that stuff, and this is what you normally would sort of relate to a cloud. However, because we are written for the service providers, for you guys, we have a reseller user layer on top of that, and we have a billing layer sitting integrating with your billing system above that. Then we have a CDN platform. The CDN platform is sort of a federated model. I will get back to that in a second. But it's a way for you guys to start competing not only with Amazon, but also with the Akamai. And basically what we do is that we tie all our OnApp clients' resources together into a large virtual pool of bandwidth, so to speak. And we allow you guys to build your own CDNs using whatever infrastructure you have in your own data centers, and then adding infrastructure inside other OnApp data centers worldwide. The CDN market is a little bit funny. I'll just spend 1 moment on that. So it's around $2.6 billion, and last year there's only 10 players in it with their own infrastructure, and the last player there is sitting on less than 1% of revenue. The margins are like insanely high. I mean, even though they all complain that the margins have been squeezed quite a lot lately, from my perspective, the CDN is really the only place with proper margins in the industry. And the reason is that the entry barriers are crazy. The hard part about launching your own CDN is not actually the software. It's those 50 POPs that you need worldwide in order to deploy the damn thing. And it's been sold the wrong way as well. I mean, I've been, back in UK2 Group, I was reselling Akamai, I was reselling Level 3, I was reselling some stage Edcast as well, and I hated every second of it. Because, I mean, I remember saying, I won't say which one of them, but I also sold IP from one of them, bandwidth. And I sat down with the guys and I sort of discussed pricing with them. I paid around 60, 80 cents per megabit for my bandwidth. And from the same supplier, I ended up having to pay more than $10 per megabit for the CDN. And obviously from the CDN seller's perspective, the cost is pretty much the same. But the reason he can sell it for $10 a meg is because it's never been disrupted, that market. The bandwidth market was disrupted by Cogent back in the 90s. But no one ever screwed up the CDN market. And that's what we're trying to do here. Yeah. So the CDN, the way we do it is we have sort of in 3 layers. We have a CDN as a service, we call it. It's basically an Anycast DNS platform that we manage, we host. We have a whole bunch of pubs worldwide that redirects visitors to the closest edge server. We then have the federation sitting in the middle. This is where you guys can buy and sell bandwidth from other on-app clients and launch your own CDN using the infrastructure you have, but also infrastructure outside of your own data centers. And then we have the stack, which is what sits in the edge pubs. And this is how we tie the whole thing together in this large on-app federation. I'll talk a lot about this federation thing because I think this is where the industry is going in general. Finally, the storage. I think actually, in the interest of my 5 minutes, I think I will suggest that you guys go to the booth tomorrow and get a demo of the storage. Julian, who is the architect behind this, we took him over from Cambridge, and he's happy to do a demo. But basically what we do is that we use, rather than having a central SAN is always the problem inside these cloud deployment. So rather than having a central SAN, we take all the drives you guys have sitting inside your hypervisors. We store them together into a large virtual block store, and we then carve out accounts into, just like you would in a normal central SAN. So we have a SAN for you guys basically using the existing drives, but without having the high CapEx associated with it. These are some of our clients, and then I will stop. These were my 5 minutes. So in on-app, we say we're here to help service providers increase profitability and remain competitive. So what does that actually mean? And that's what I want to talk about today. I'm a man with a mission today. I want to talk about how you guys have a chance to beat Amazon. How do you guys have a chance to still remain profitable and competitive, even though everything around you is changing, even though everything around you is getting more expensive, more competitive, more commoditized. This is what I want to talk about today. So first, I just want to outline the cloud phases, sort of to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. From my perspective, when I started in the cloud business, sort of, I guess it was launching VPS.net back in 2008 or something like that, 2009. And back then, we had conversion rates above 10%. But we did no marketing at all. And we could do that because we were pretty much, together with like a handful of other guys, the only ones with a serious offering. And that has changed already now. You can't just build it and it will come. That was like 2 years ago. It's already commoditizing. It's already getting harder. And pricing are getting squeezed. The margins are getting squeezed. And it will only get worse. I think, from my perspective, the cloud is going in these 3 phases. The first phase is when the cloud was cool and sexy and people bought it just because it was cloud without really knowing what to use it for. And the second phase is when it's commoditizing. This is probably where we are now. And third phase, and I can't wait for this phase, is when the cloud is no longer the cloud, but just how stuff is done. Because then this initial discussion about what cloud is can hopefully go away. And we can just start talking about the problems that cloud solve rather than what is and what isn't cloud. So as I said, I wanted to talk about one of the headaches that we all have. And this is how we identify him in the office. We do like Star Wars, and Amazon goes by the Dark Lord. So we think this is the major headache for all of you, and we think that if you guys are not taking it serious now, you better well start to do it, otherwise you'll be in big trouble. If you sort of sum up, Amazon is with like $1.5 billion of revenue out of a $3 billion market. And if you wonder, how the hell did it happen? I mean, the uptime is terrible. They went down again last week. Was it 2 weeks ago for 8 hours? 2 weeks before that, they were down for 8 hours. Half of the West, all the San Francisco, Palo Alto startups were down. You couldn't open a lot of the normal websites you would go to because Amazon sort of powers the whole thing. Not the best uptime, terrible. Well, I'm a little bit biased here, but if I ran my hosting business from a support perspective the way that Amazon ran theirs, I would have a really hard time staying alive, really. It's very expensive, and they have this linear cost structure. So there's this inverse proportionality between how much you buy and the cost associated with it. It's a little bit odd when you think about it. If someone came to you and bought one server, and then the next day bought 1,000 servers, you would probably expect to get the 1,000 server cheaper. That's not how it works there. There's a linear cost structure, which actually works against you as you grow. They hardly do any marketing. And they're not exactly user-friendly, and they're very hard to move in and out of. So, yeah. From my perspective, they have three things going for them. And this is really key. So they have the scale, and they have the geographical reach, and they have this fantastic product breadth that they've managed to build over the last few years. And from those three things, no one in this room will be able to compete with them. I'll go through them one by one now. The scale. Yeah, I do love these, these pictures. Total legal geek here. I mean, if you go to Amazon and ask for 1,000 servers, they will actually be able to give it to you like this. And if you didn't want them anymore, you can give them back to them next hour. In UK2 Group, I was like a $40 million company or something like that, maybe a little bit more. And we actually tried it once. Someone coming to us, a client we've had for a long time, a large retail chain, came to us and said, what if I want to buy 1,000 servers? What would the terms be? And I had to say, well, you know what, I'll buy them. But we were bootstrapped, debt-free. We owned all our hardware, didn't lease anything. So for me to buy 1,000 servers, even though we're a $40 million company, it's really tough. But so I would always ask for at least a year or two, maybe even 3 years of committed service afterwards, in order for me to make sure my return on investments was ensured here. Amazon don't care about that stuff. They have, you know, it's a different kind of game for them. It's a different kind of scale. And for each of us, how big you may be, it's probably only a handful of service providers out there that are able to even consider doing something like this. And I don't know anyone else who would be happy actually doing it on an Amazon kind of scale. We lost that client, by the way, because that client in UK2, that client would probably never buy 1,000 servers, but the perceived value of not being able to deliver it was actually enough for them to say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with these small timers. Another is the geographical reach. So I had a busy day with my kids at the beach, and I brought all the cameras and stuff and all the Lego. So yeah, only Amazon and perhaps Software, and to some extent UK2 Group actually, is able to present that many different locations with one pane of glass in front of it. So they are in 9 locations now. They tend to open a new one every quarter. And going back to UK2 Group, if someone came to me and said, for example, well, you know, this VPS.net stuff you're doing is really cool, but we would like to do it in Tokyo. Well, before we opened in Tokyo, I would actually have to send them to friends and family I have in Tokyo, friends in the industry. I may get an affiliate fee in return, but I would probably lose the client. And the client would obviously prefer to have one account manager, to have one pane of glass of administration, one portal, as Phil spoke about before, to manage all this infrastructure across all these data centers. And Amazon is really the only one that can do that, together perhaps with a few others like Software and perhaps UK2 Group. Finally, the product breadth. If you go back in the time, the EC2 stuff was really simple. It's basically a glorified VPS server, and they didn't do a very good job at it initially. But then they started to build around it. They built all the dynamic databases, the DNS, the email engines, all that stuff they have now, the Beanstalk, and it's becoming really a sort of a total candy shop for developers now, and they all have one set of APIs across it. It's really hard for any of you without an army of developers to compete with that. So another thing I think has been important to them, again from a perceived value perspective, is the use case. Like they had this notion in the beginning and said, look how well we're doing, and you guys can do just as well if you host with us. Rumors say though that they didn't actually move their own infrastructure to the Amazon AWS as we know it before 2010. And the funny thing is, it's not the same dog food, guys. Whenever Amazon is down, for some reason, the dog food that Amazon.com is eating is different than the one they're serving to the rest of us. So, but I think it was a use case it was an important point for their launch, and that's probably why they could get this much success without actually doing much marketing, because they already have a fantastic brand name out there. Everyone knew they had enormous scale behind them. But I think it's important in any industry that you need a big use case. And from that perspective, probably Amazon have helped us, all of us, because they've been able to sort of commercialify, whatever you say, to prove that the cloud is actually a viable model. I have an example of that, how that works. You know how you all say the best thing since sliced bread? But actually, the sliced bread was invented back in 1912 by this guy. And it was quite fairly complicated in the beginning. That was a bread slicer. This was his patent that he launched filed in 1932. And sliced bread wasn't really popular because you needed half of your kitchen's room in order to slice this bread. It wasn't really before Wonder Bread came in the 50s that the whole sliced bread thing took off, because those guys managed to commoditize it, managed to make it an everyday thing. They managed to scale it. And obviously Amazon took it to the extreme. But I think my point is, I think the use case is very important. If you ask Gartner, Gartner started in 2011 for the first time to make this infrastructure as a service Magic Quadrant, which is really cool stuff. And see if this one works. Yeah, so Amazon is sitting right here. And if you ask them why, they say it's because they have the largest, all the stuff I've just been talking about. They have the largest pool of capacity, they have the largest ecosystem, and so on and so on. And here we have some of my favorite companies, my heroes, like Software, as I mentioned before, sitting down where you don't want to be, down in the left corner. And that just makes me wonder, how does that actually happen? So all my heroes, the Federation, is sitting down here, and Amazon is managing to cover the upper right corner where you want to be. So I just want to talk briefly about, but Phil spoke about that just before. I just want to talk briefly about what we are missing out here. I mean, you have the dedicated server market growing single digit, 5%, maybe 8% at best. They're so 80s, that's why I put this guy. So dedicated server market at 5-8% or something like that. You have the shared hosting market growing 7%. There's large shared hosters out there, really big ones, not growing at all. And then you have the IaaS market growing 70%. So really, cloud is by far, and without any doubt, the largest commercial opportunity we've had in our industry. And we've all been sleeping in class and left it to this bookshop. The second problem, and that's a problem I've been fighting with myself when I was in the industry, is the whole thing about our industry commoditizing as fast as it is. I mean, basically when you're selling domain names, if you're selling diddleo.com, and if you bought it from 123reg or from my old company, UK2 Group, it's the same damn domain name. You can't do anything about it. How do you decommoditize yourself? How do you get out of this price war and margin squeezing when the product is so fundamentally the same? That goes for servers as well. You know, a dedicated box is pretty much a dedicated box no matter what you do to it. And I think that's a big struggle here. And I think the AWS is sort of even getting worse now, because they're taking away all the goodwill around it and sort of boiling it down to the price per hour for resources. So now it's not even about the data center. It's not about the goodwill. It's not about the service around it. It's about the price per gigabyte or per CPU per hour. And that makes it really hard for someone who's worked for hours or for years and years in order to build this goodwill around their organization. And to now have to explain why my gigabytes are better than his gigabytes, that's really tough. And it's very hard to differentiate yourself. So it becomes really a price and CPA war. I've seen that again and again. It's this binary business model. You basically have two levers, because when something is totally commoditized, when this server or this domain name or this shared hosting account is pretty much the same, you only have two options. You can either lower your price, which you don't want to do, or you can up your marketing, which you don't want to do. So that's really the tough part here. And I'm getting these guys coming to me and saying, Diddleo, I'm doing the same thing as all the big guys. I'm running the same ads as the 123reg guys. I'm doing the same stuff as Rackspace. My support is even better. Why isn't it working? And I think it's pretty much because it's becoming a bottled water game. It's pretty much the same stuff that to some extent a lot of you are selling and that I was selling as well. I call it Where's Waldo marketing, because this is what a service, this is what someone looking for a service is facing. This is the marketplace for hosting, and finding Waldo is really hard. And each of you obviously think you're Waldo, but for the service, for the guy looking for a service, the difference is really hard to spot. Another problem is CapEx. I spoke briefly about it before. Even in my old business, which was actually a fairly large one, having the ability to compete with the big guys, both in terms of large orders, but also data centers, being able to pay for this army of R&D that you need in order to compete nowadays, is really hard. So I think sort of from these three perspectives, the Amazon challenge, the CapEx challenge, but also the commoditization challenge, is probably the three main sort of challenges I had back in UK2 Group. So what to do? How do you handle this? Well, as I said, I'm on a man on a mission here, and I think I have the Holy Grail. I think the way to do this is for all of you to stop thinking about your business the way you do now. Is to turn the whole thing around and stop looking at the guy sitting next to you as though he's a competitor, but look at him as though he was your best friend. Look at him like he's the guy who can actually save your business. He's the guy who can help you be competitive, help dealing with the scale, the geographical reach, and the product breadth. I'll talk about it here. So imagine if all of you guys teamed up. Imagine if you guys agreed with me and said that this federation is, that this Amazon problem is actually serious. Imagine that we all agreed that scale is a problem and that the R&D on a single user level, single hosting company is a problem, and that the geographical reach that I spoke about before is a problem. If we all teamed together, if we all found a way to have a common platform, if we all found a way to make my scale, my data centers, make that available to your scale and your data centers, we will be able to compete against AWS. We would have more scale. Across this room, we probably have, what, 200, 100 service providers. We probably have, what, 70 data centers. If we found a common way to present that, if we found a way for the user to be able to tap into those 70 data centers or 100 data centers, or how many we have in this room, Amazon would have nothing on us. And there's 33,000 hosting companies worldwide. In this room, we only have, what, 150. But together, we would have enough scale. We would have better geographical reach. There are 9 data centers. How many data centers are we in here? We're probably in, what, 20 countries? Across the on-app base, we have more than 1,000 installs. It's probably across 40, 50, maybe more countries. And we would have a wider product breadth. Again, I just talk out of the on-app experience. I mean, we have all sorts of strange products being built on top of on-app. We have guys in Brazil dealing with clear water technology. We have e-commerce specialists, CRM systems, and all sorts of things being built on top of on-app. If those guys didn't focus as much on solving their own problems for their own clients, but actually enabled all of you to solve the same problems for all your clients. If you are able to tap into not only their infrastructure, not only these remote locations they're sitting in, but also the products that will be running inside of those locations, you'll be able to, not only from the scale and the geographical reach, but also from the product perspective, to compete with anyone. But it does require you to stop thinking about the guy next to you as a competitor. You need to think of him as the guy who will help you remain, as I said initially, competitive and profitable. So if you take these guys again, and I don't think these guys would do this, but let's just say they did. Let's say that these guys teamed up and stopped looking at each other as competitors, but actually helped each other to realize that, you know what, we need to federate, we need to work together in order to build a meaningful, a credible alternative to the Amazons. But it's not only Amazon, it's also Azure, it's Google engine and the things going on there. If these guys teamed up, well, they would have a larger pool of capacity. They would have, if they had a common set of APIs, which is not too hard really, they would have a larger, a much larger set of tools sitting below those APIs than Amazon would ever be able to come up with. And they will be able to compete. So the federation down here will actually be a real alternative. So what happens if we don't do it? I think if we don't, I think these will be the years we will look back at. These will be the years where we as an industry would look back and say that the long tail have disappeared. There are 33,000 hosting companies in the world with more than 1 million of revenue, more than 5 employees, and more than 1,000 domain names. I think if we don't help each other out, I think maybe in 3-4 years there'll be 5,000 left. In 10 years there'll probably be 1,000 left. Because on your own, it's really hard to deal with this kind of thing. As I said before, I ran a fairly large company, 40 million or so of revenue, and I was clueless. I wouldn't know how to do that on my own. But working together, we have a real chance here. So I think if we don't do it, we'll be in all sorts of trouble. Amazon will catch up with us. I just put this slide in there because I thought it was... Amazon will catch up with us, and we'll be without proper occupation. We'll have all sorts of problems. Whereas the Amazon's headquarters. We'll have a golden time, and we'll be the site slaves sitting there. So that's pretty much my story here. Leverage your current infrastructure, but open it up to others. Extend your reach by federating. Grow your business without growing CapEx, because CapEx is the devil in this industry. And finally, obviously, we're happy to help. A cheap one, right? So these were probably what I wanted to go through here, but those of you who have seen my presentations before know that I dig these Q&A sessions. So I will take questions here, and if you don't have any, I have my own. So let's start with, I'll just go back here. So.
Where's the emperor at?
Yeah, you're going to ask who's my father or what? Yeah, he's not a part of this game. He isn't. Yeah, answer.
So when do we get to have cloud federation?
Well, it requires a change. I mean, the technology is there, right? So if you look at it from this perspective, for this to work, you need a critical mass of supply on one side. So if it was only the first row here who decided to do this, you guys couldn't do it. We need at least 5 or 10 rows in order to work out. So that's the first thing to do, really, right? Is to come up with a common federation of a set of meaningful infrastructure in meaningful locations with proper products sitting on top of it, and then a common API sitting behind and also in front of it. And then obviously there needs to be a demand side as well. So for this to work out, it's not enough for you guys to make it available and then wait for other people to buy it. No, you also have to actually start selling other people's infrastructure. Because if everyone is just putting the stuff available, but no one is actually starting to distribute or to build demand for it, the federation wouldn't work. It's like a traditional butterfly model, really, with the supply side and the demand side.
But it works actually for the CDN.
We're doing it for, ONAP is doing it for the CDN now, more really of need. It wasn't because we wanted to save any industry, or wasn't a philanthropic project of any sense. We just wanted to make sure there was a way to beat up the, well, also I had a personal grouch against these guys, because it was really tough. But we wanted to make sure there was a way for the everyday hoster to build a CDN without having a $50 million check up front needed. We have some great companies, CDN 77 sitting right there is one of them, have built a fantastic CDN on this technology. Yeah?
So if ONAP federates the technology, provides federation technology, how do you federate the market? How do you come up with what pricing is going to be across all of these different companies?
I wouldn't, if ONAP was the federating thing in the middle, if you have the butterfly, and if ONAP sat here, I wouldn't set any pricing. Pricing would have to be set by you guys.
How does that work itself out?
Sorry?
How do you envision that working itself out with achieving a supply and demand balance price?
Do you know when you guys go on Amazon.com, not AWS, and you buy a vacuum cleaner, whatever you buy on Amazon, and what happens there is that this vacuum cleaner is not actually supplied by Amazon. It's always someone else in the marketplace. Because Amazon, some cases, they have their own sort of, fulfillment, but in most cases, it's actually someone in the marketplace supplying that. Now, if you took that model and put it on top of infrastructure, and if you took away Amazon and put you guys in instead, then each of you would be able to build your own marketplaces for infrastructure with one common set of APIs in front of it. One infrastructure that is totally mirrored if we manage to get this right. If all of you guys think it's a good idea, if we manage to get this right. So I think like any other marketplace, there will be a bunch of objective information and subjective information that will define whatever people are willing to pay for it. So if you have a marketplace like Amazon, well, prices is put naturally, right? Because there's so many different suppliers of comparable services that it's probably the ones doing the best job at the sort of providing the best service at the best price. It's not always the cheapest guys, because they may have very poor reviews, or they may have very long supply times or whatever. It tends to be, the marketplace tends to work out in a way so the consumer ends up winning, right? It also, and if you go back to one of my points here, can I run a crappy hosting business? Well, in a federation world, you can't. because no one would buy your crappy infrastructure, and no one would deal with your crappy support, and no one would believe in this crappy unlimited stuff anymore. Because all of those things in an informed marketplace would disappear.
Wouldn't federating and putting all of our material into this wrong in this web page, Amazon web page, wouldn't that further push us towards just price per gigabyte instead of the current differentiation?
I think what it, yeah.
Individual, I have to pick up a model. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying though. Yeah.
It makes it even harder when you're just a list on a page. There's no business relationship behind that. You're anonymous. All that I have is maybe some ratings from a couple customers, and 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, and 5 stars.
So,
It makes it more for that money.
so I think 2 things here. I think being a hosting buyer right now is really hard. I think when someone came to me in UK2 group and asked, so how's your hosting? I would say it's really good, right? But they wouldn't really have any idea about it. If they go to any of the review sites out there, if they go to any of these top sites, those stars and all those reviews are all paid for. It's all based on who's paying most in affiliate fees. That's how you get listed in the top. That's how our industry unfortunately works. Everyone in this room probably tried to pay for that stuff. I did. I know it worked. So I think if we actually create an informed marketplace where the broker is no longer the guy making the money for it, where the user now has a bunch of objective information and a bunch of subjective information, which is actually real. If you have some objective information that could be stuff like topologies, the SAS 70/2 certifications, DSS, PCI, and all these things, and then if you, on the subjective side, and by the way, objective stuff could also be uptime, it could be ping times from different places in the world, and then you would have on the subjective data, you would have all the things like the reviews from different users, and in the B2B, which the host-to-host, when you guys buy from each other, the host-to-host marketplaces will be functioning the same way. I think this is not actually, as you mentioned, I don't think the important part here is building one large page where all these services would be listed. I think the important part is for you guys to stop losing clients. I know back in UK2 group, if someone came to me back then and said, can I please get this hosting in Tokyo? And that happened to me, not necessarily Tokyo, but it could be Turkey or it could be wherever. It happened to me all the time. And if I had a way for them to say, yeah, sure, and then just go to my marketplace, my B2B, my host-to-host marketplace, and deploy the server, and making it transparent to the end user because there would be one pane of glass, one API sets. It would be a true alternative to Amazon. I think it's the only way of doing it. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Just follow up to that.
Yeah.
So would it work too as well if that world was just for the hosters? In other words, I go out and sell my services to my base, and then if I want to go and get space from one of the other people in the federation,
yeah,
then I can go to that portal and pick who I want.
That's what I'm saying.
In other words, the consumer isn't going there, it's the Amazon model, but we can share with each other. Wouldn't that make more sense?
It absolutely makes sense. Absolutely. I think that's the holy grail you're talking about right there. I think a way for you to tap into other people's infrastructure for the scale, the geographical reach, and the products would make perfect sense. Go ahead, Sarah, you had it.
Name another example where a federation of companies trying to compete with a large competitor, another product in the IT field or even another field that works on all that.
So I actually I so wanted this mouse to work. 1 second. This thing didn't work. Yeah, totally. So what I did here, that question here, it must work, come on. Yeah. So my point is that all industries consolidate. These are just sort of random 30, 40 examples I found when I did this work. I really looked hard for examples where this didn't happen, and I found 2. Shipping industry is a perfect example. I know it's not related to what any of us is doing here, but when you send something from UK where I live to Los Angeles where someone else lives, you have one point of contact, but you know that package goes through like 20 hands on the way. And the only reason that works is because someone has sat down and built a common system across all these suppliers, where your tracking number would work across it, where everyone is able to follow a package sitting across all these suppliers, and where one price would be served to you by some sort of broker that would have access to the whole, going back to your point, have access to the whole infrastructure behind. Another example could be all the co-ops. I'm from Denmark. In Denmark, that's where how dairies, milk, what did you say? Dairies work? Is that an English word, dairies? Yeah. So the milk production and cheese and all that stuff. You know, it's always, in Denmark at least, it's a bunch of, thousands of independent farmers that have realized that once the big guys started to enter the market, they were in trouble. So what they did was they federated, working together in order to deal with the distribution first and foremost, but also be able to deal with a centralized way of producing milk, which is basically what I'm talking about here, producing milk and cheese and all the other products in a sustainable way to compete with bigger companies.
I think cell phone and wireless is a perfect example. T-Mobile, AT&T, use whatever provider.
Yeah, but it's really consolidated, right? So cell phone, Nick is saying that cell phone industry is another example, but it's still like 10 players. So,
of course.
Yeah.
But they travel worldwide.
So I have 3 questions here. I think you were first, actually. Sorry.
All right, so I think another...
Does it make sense to you, first of all?
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do you imagine support in an environment like this where, say, I have all my clients that are trying to keep them by enlisting the services of others in the federation. And with the breadth of products, they're going to offer products that I don't myself offer. I don't have expertise in that. I don't have support depth in that, but I don't want to send my customer to someone else. I want to present them on a uniform front for support. How does that jive?
So if you go back to the 3 things, what are we talking about here? We're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about scale, and we're talking about geographical reach, and then we talk about the product breadth, which is what you're referring to, right? I think if this worked out, and that's also going back to your point there, sir, if this works out, you will find some software vendors saying, screw that, I only really had this infrastructure because I wanted to sell my software. So this is my core competence, and by the way, the infrastructure is a wheel that has already been invented. So now I'm a software supplier, and you know what, I'm a really good developer, and I'm really good at supporting the software I've built, but I suck at selling it. So all I want to do now is build software for the service providers, for them to start enhancing their service. And I don't even want to sell it. I want to supply it through a marketplace, through a federation infrastructure. And doing that, suddenly, the core competence of this company changes from being an infrastructure business to being a software, and around the software, this service and support required for it to run and function. So I think if you talk sort of on practical terms, I could imagine that there could be a level 1 level support sitting, depending on the complexity of the software, right? But sitting with the actual supplier, so with the hosting company. But level 2 and 3 would have to come directly from the software supplier in that case. Going back to the infrastructure, we're in UK2 group. I forgot now, but some of you guys from UK2 would know it. 7,000 servers, whatever. We had a lot of servers in SoftLayer. We had like 7,000 servers there, 5,000 servers, a whole bunch of servers in SoftLayer. And to some extent, that's the same story here, right? I basically took a significant part of our business, put it in someone else's data center. Personally, I've never been to a SoftLayer data center. I know some of my guys had, but I've never been to a SoftLayer data center. It's exactly the same thing. So for this to work, you need to find this room in yourself that allows you to deploy important stuff in other people's infrastructure. And even worse, as an infrastructure supplier, you need to find in yourself a way to agree to actually giving away your infrastructure to someone else without knowing what it's being used for. So these are sort of the 2 components that needs to function in a marketplace like this, otherwise it just wouldn't work. Those 2 other questions. Yeah. Yeah. And it's somehow you can use the example, like when I'm in here in US, my phone is roaming, right? And to some extent what I'm really doing is I'm federating. So the suppliers are federating into the roaming. So I'm getting the geographical reach I'm looking for here, that I'm talking about, my gospel, right? I'm getting the geographical reach that I'm talking about here as an end user, without really thinking about it.
Yeah, I guess that's what
Yeah, totally right. And across borders as well. I don't think there's a place in the world where my phone wouldn't work. So it's the same kind of thing, right? All right, you can pick any of these questions as well. We have a few minutes. Yeah. So where was Waldo? Does this? Yeah. Yeah, so he's right here. Guys, that's how hard it is. So I think I will talk briefly about, I think I will just, number 6. All right. So I looked this up actually. And apparently 15,400 other people also looked it up. The common conception is that the best thing before sliced bread was the mousetrap. And some guy patented it back in 1897. Now, what I wanted to talk about is this commoditization. I know that it's not so related to the Amazon story, but I think as an endpoint is a good one to start with. Yeah, so I wanted to find 2 examples here of companies that have managed to decommoditize themselves without actually changing the product a whole lot. These guys, unfortunately, I've tried to look them up. They have a lot of domains attached to them, but I don't know how well they're doing when it boils down to it. But I really hope they're doing extremely well, because I think the concept is beautiful. They sort of look themselves in the eyes and say, you know what, we all provide crappy support. And everyone is trying to sell hosting at $5, and we all know it doesn't work in principle. It's like this bumblebee that really can't fly. And so what they said is that, you know what, in this company, we sell $1 hosting, but we ignore all the questions. It's a fantastic setup. And down here, all the questions they get, they list them down. You should look them up. They list all the questions down here. Sort of all these amateurs. Look at this guy. He doesn't know how to check his email. And look at this guy. He doesn't know how to use FTP and so on. What a fool. So they have gone all the way and said, you know, the real cost of my business is not actually the infrastructure. The real cost of my business is managing the support around it. And if I stay true to my client and say, you know, my support is not very good, and I'm going to tell you up front, but in return, it's $1 a month. I really like that. Now these guys here, it's pretty much the same product. These are 2 cPanel setups, but these guys here are selling the same shared hosting account. They call this white glove hosting. It's beautiful. They sell the same hosting account for $799. I know these guys are doing really well in sort of certain design communities, large e-commerce shops and stuff like that. And you don't get any root access to anything. You don't get any sort of guaranteed resources. It's basically a shared hosting account running cPanel. So they both decommoditize themselves by adding or taking away stuff. And I think it's fantastic examples. I have another example. This is my favorite. I've used this before, so I'm sorry if you've seen it before. So this is AppsFleet in UK. And if this is nowhere, then that is the middle of it. And these guys used to be like a tourist magnet back in sort of the 70s. People came there on sort of weekend takeover, family go-aways kind of things, and they had nice hotels just close to the water and so on. But then all these other sort of Great Stoner, whatever, Sandwich, whatever those places, Sandwich Bay, they started to sort of catch up with them and say, you know, what these guys in AppsFleet is doing, we can do the same. So they went ahead and built hotels, and suddenly the AppsFleet service was commoditized. Suddenly this stuff they were doing was not very cool anymore. And the founding fathers of AppsFleet sat together. They had some money left actually for back in the heydays. They sat down and said, all right, so what are we going to do about this? Some people said, let's build a huge hotel and so on. But then the other guys, then the Sandwich guys are just going to build a big hotel as well. So that won't work. So what are we going to do? And this is what they decided to do. They built a 164-foot horse in the middle of the AppsFleet's countryside. Just to compare to your Statue of Liberty, that's how it would look. This is, by the way, something I put in. It's not, and I guess the logic behind it, how far out it may seem, is that if I was looking for this hotel somewhere on the west coast, east coast, I guess it is, of UK, and if all the hotels were the same, I would go to the place with the 164-foot horse. And I think this is, to a large extent, what hosting is all about. It's about building these 164-feet horses that can decommoditize you, take you out of the transparency, ensure that you're not only a question about the lowest price or the highest marketing costs, so the highest CPAs, getting listed highest on those fake review sites that we all hate. So I think that will probably be my takeaway from this. Unless there's any other questions, I don't think we can. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
I've discussed the
So from my perspective, I think, so what, just let me just try to repeat, sorry if I cut it short here, but what you're saying is by actually doing this, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you will end up having, creating larger advantages to people outside of your own business than you actually will get out of it yourself?
But what I do is, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Where I'm from hockey space, right now the NHL is going to be developing lockouts. Okay? Because when you create the first CPA, the union contract, whatever, you put strict rules, and then people find ways to navigate the rules. Then you have teams that offer 100 million contracts like that. It's not supposed to be like that. So that's my point here. Is we're going to pull, let's say, 50 companies or 50 whatever, and then I'm going to provide them my infrastructure, okay? And then they're going to buy the service from me with their name through a white label system. At one point, somebody is going to be bigger than the others.
I think the business will split up in 3 layers. The industry, as we know it, will probably split up in 3. There will be people that will specializing in different sorts of different sort of segments of what we all of us are all doing now. So there will be companies that say, you know what, I'm not that good at selling, but I'm really good at running an effective infrastructure. And those companies will probably go to your point really and say, my core competency here is providing cost-effective infrastructure for the remaining part of the hosting industry. I won't have a single sales guy sitting there. I'll just use this federation, these marketplaces. Then there will be other players sitting in a totally different end, saying my core competence is having these contacts to specific unions, to specific parties that are able to create demand within specific segments of some certain industry. And I probably shouldn't be in the infrastructure space then, because that is a solved problem already by someone else. And then by teaming these 2 guys together, each of you will be doing what you're doing best, and you'll be able to, from the end user perspective, to actually probably supply a cheaper and a better product. And then finally, from like we discussed here earlier, there will be software vendors, which is the 3rd part, right? That will create software that glues this stuff together into SaaS or PaaS applications sitting on top of it. Yeah, it's pretty out there. I know it's pretty out there. I just think if we're not doing it, guys, if we're not doing it, I want to repeat that, if we're not doing something like this, then the industry as we know it will change. And there will not be 33,000 hosting companies anymore. There just isn't room for it. I listed 100 examples here of companies of industries like ours that have consolidated over the last 10, 20 years. And it will happen to this one as well, unless we learn from the shipping industry, unless we learn from other companies and industries that have managed to work together. All right. I'm straight here for questions or anything. I promise to. I'm already 4 minutes past my time here. So thanks, anyone, for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.